Jihad. I hope y'all enjoying Dark Horse Assassin so far. Well, without further ado, let's keep this thing going. Chapter 6, April 9th, 2002. Now, this is 4 days later. Ile-Ife, Nigeria is the setting. Woo! Dr. Boyd said as he used a handkerchief to wipe the sweat pouring from his brow. It's hotter than a whorehouse in hell on nickel night. How can you stand to be outside in this Nigerian heat, Baba? If man were created in the likeness of God, then Baba was created in the likeness of Marcus Garvey. Short, stout, and dark. He even had a commanding presence reminiscent of Garvey. His mannerisms were Garvey-esque, Dr. Royce thought, as the blazing African sun beamed down on his mentor's sweating bald head. The two men were out back walking through the palace's 8-foot-high maze of a million flowers. The man that answered to many names such as Your Highness, Uni, Ududuwa, and Baba was dressed like a rich medieval king sorcerer instead of the Uni of Ile-Ife, also known as the city where creation began. Oba is the name for king in Yoruba culture, with the exception of the king of Ile-Ife, Nigeria, which is sort of like the Mecca or the Bethlehem of the Yoruba people. The Uni is the name for the king of the sacred and legendary city of Ile-Ife, located in southwestern Nigeria. Baba's hands were clasped behind his back as he seemed to float on air as he led Reverend Boyce through the winding 5-acre maze of flowers and greenery. My brother, the middle-aged, dark-skinned man stopped, closed his eyes, and extended his heavily jewel-clad hands and arms to the heavens. What you feel are sunbursts of energy. Baba's chest rose as he tried to take in all the air out of the sky. Exhaling, he said, doesn't that warmth just invigorate you? Yeah, I'm invigorated to get in some air conditioning. This African heat makes me think that the good Lord is hosting the world's biggest barbecue. Whew. Reverend Boy stopped and looked at his friend's attire. Baba, you have to be slow roasting in all that royal regalia. I'm used to the royal garments and headdress. I've been wearing them long enough. But can we please go inside the palace before all that red, the Reverend pointed at the heavy robe Baba wore, catches on fire? And will you please take off that beaded headdress so I can see your face when we speak? You know I can't remove my crown. But it's only the two of us here, Baba. You only see two of us, but I assure you there are more. And if any of them look into my eyes, they will burn to ashes. Well, hell, they might as well look into your eyes and get it over with instead of being slow roasted in this oven heat. Baba placed a huge dark hand on Reverend Boyce's back. Come, let's go inside. I feel Zion's energy stirring anyway. He's awake? Dr. Boyce asked as he followed the Nigerian king into the royal palace. Not yet. This was his 4th time visiting the palace in the last half century. Each time, the face and body were different. The other Uni's bodies had died, but the spirit and soul in all of the Unis, were that of Baba Oduduwa. His first encounter with Baba was in '55, a few days after he'd spoken at the Bandung conference in Indonesia. Dr. Boyce had flown straight from Indonesia to Nigeria on April 25th, the day after the largest gathering of non-Western world leaders was held. On the 26th, Dr. Boyce was chest deep in sand and dirt. He had been on an archaeological dig 200 miles northwest of the sacred city, Ile-Ife, when he dug up a small hand-carved black jewelry box. He had tried to open it, but it had been locked. So he took it inside his tent and dug up enough dirt to bury it until he could get back to it later that evening. By the time he dragged himself into the tent that evening, back in 55, all he had enough energy was for sleep. That night, the weirdest thing had happened. A God-like spirit had come to him in a dream. Normally, the Reverend was a skeptic, but when he first met Baba Oduduwa in that dream 47 years ago, he had no doubt that the Uni was who he proclaimed to be. To this very day, Dr. Boyce couldn't even begin to explain how he had been so sure that Baba had been sent by the Creator to prepare the 12 men that would serve as the Council of Clerics, to help nurture and protect the Messiah until he acquired the 360 degrees of knowledge needed to defeat evil. The Spirit had explained to the Reverend Doctor that it was a jewelry box that could only be opened by a direct descendant of the Yoruba goddess Oba. Being that he was an archaeologist and world-renowned theologian, the Reverend Doctor was well versed in Vodun African-centered spirituality. Dr. Boyce was one of a small handful of people living in the 50s that knew and had empirical evidence that Christianity was a derivative of Vodun spirituality. At the time of his discovery, he was a 28-year-old African-American archaeologist working on his PhD in Christian theology. Thanks to Baba and the ancient texts he gave Dr. Boyce to study, he became the leading world scholar in Vodun, Islamic, and Christian spirituality. After several years of research, Dr. Boyce came to the conclusion that all three spiritual concepts were virtually the same once you put them in their original context. Each time Dr. Boyce had visited the Uni over the years, it was a different face and body, but the spirit and voice were always the same. Baba and the Reverend Doctor were in the Uni's library inside Baba's royal bedchambers. As if pressing in a code, Baba touched the number on the spine of 6 of the 24 volumes of the Book of Knowledge before the bookcase parted like the Red Sea. The two men stepped into the small elevator that the wall-to-wall bookcase opened up into. Dr. Boyce was wondering how far down they were going, and he was about to ask when the elevator slowed to a stop before the titanium doors opened. Amazing. Wow. Dr. Boyce said as he stepped out of the elevator and rubbed his hand across a gray rock wall. Simply amazing. He rubbed his fingers together. Gneisses, granite, and some other metavolcanic substance. Dr. Boyce continued studying the rock sediment on his hands. No way to be sure without testing it, but I'm almost positive that this cave is Precambrian. Baba stopped and turned to the Reverend Doctor. I don't know what that means. It means that this cave is somewhere around 2.5 to 3.5 billion years old. 3,637,476,819 years, but who's counting? Baba said before he continued walking through the cave. That would mean this cave was here before man. Dr. Boyce stopped walking to marvel at the changing rock walls. Amazing. Baba smiled. I assure you, Reverend, they are real. When we brought Zion here 4 days ago, Dr. Boyce pointed at the 3-story cave walls, all of this was just gray rock. Well, not gray, but it still is just rock. Baba looked over at the transparent enclosure that Zion was resting inside of before walking toward his unconscious guest. He did this? How? Zion's been unconscious the whole time he's been here, Dr. Boyce said as he walked up next to Baba. Both men were looking into the glass-like chamber that held only a bed and Zion's 10-year-old unconscious frame. Right here, where we are standing, is where creation began. Yerithe was the first city, and once upon a time it was known as the City of Gods. Being that young Zion here is the last descendant of Shango, the god of fire, lightning, and thunder, his subconscious mind has manifested enough energy to cause these walls to transform into the diamonds that you are now looking at. Have to be at least 2,200 degrees, probably a lot hotter for the rock to begin to even change. Dr. Boyce said, don't leave out the pressure. It would take at least 725,000 pounds per square inch after the rock is heated to that 2,200 degrees. No man or animal can survive under those circumstances. And this glass cage would have melted along with the bed. Anything would have melted. I agree, but as you know, Zion is much more than man or animal. You know, before Shango's deification, Shango was a warrior king, the king of the Oyo Empire, a true unselfish servant of the people, one of the very few rulers to have been corrupted by power. God, Allah, or Allah, as I like to refer to the Supreme Creator, bestowed certain aspects of his supreme wisdom to some mortals. Shango was one such mortal. The supreme wisdom transformed mortal into a god, or for lack of a better word, an intermediary between man and creator, sort of like the prophets, Yeshua, Moses, and Abraham. And remember, my Christian friend, none of the 4 horsemen are mere mortals. And we know that Zion is destined to be the 3rd horseman, the dark horse assassin, and he has but one God-given mission: